Are you right wing or left wing? Um, my favorite wings are, um, honestly, I really like buffalo wings.
Hi, and welcome back to Through the Muck and the Mire. For episode 3, I spoke with a biomedical scientist. We talked about the coronavirus and some of the information that's being spread on social media right now. We happened to record our interview the same day as the film or short video Plandemic was released on YouTube. We didn't directly speak on that. We actually hadn't talked about it directly, or neither one of us had actually even watched that video completely before our interview. We did inadvertently talk about some of the topics that are talked about in that video, such as wearing masks and Medicare payouts to hospitals and stuff like that. So this isn't a response directly to that video. This is just us talking about information. I do need to say also that the opinions and statements that we make in this video only belong to us. They don't represent any institution that we work for or attend. So, and also keep in mind that all of this information is liable to change today or tomorrow. This is a rapidly advancing virus, and it's also an ever-changing science and medical field. So, new information comes out every day and things change. With that in mind, her political compass is right here. She's left-leaning. I'd like to keep the political compass a part of the show just for full transparency in case there is some type of bias in either direction. But I will say that I know Kelly personally. She comes from a biomedical science background, and she does this for a living. So I personally believe that she is looking at this from a scientific, unbiased, objective perspective, and I trust her. But you can decide that for yourself. Anyways, I hope you enjoy the content, and if you do, please like, subscribe, and share. And as always, cheers. Thanks. Anyways. Hey, Kelly, thanks for joining me. You go ahead and introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, David, thanks for having me. I'm a biomedical researcher. I work in a gene and stem cell therapy lab for an academic institution. Basically, what we do is we take viruses and try to adjust the way that they would normally infect people and deliver therapeutic genes instead of diseases. We've also had a couple of stem cell trials, first in man. We kind of work with collaborators that want to use our expertise. So they might come to us with an idea and we help test. Masters in neuroscience, and I've been working for I just had my 4th year in the lab.
Okay. And you've been working directly with COVID-19 as well, right?
So we have been trying to figure out how my lab could potentially use our resources to help. But because of what we currently do, which is taking viruses and attenuating them, so adjusting them to be safer, It's not really a good model to study COVID because it's so infectious, and that's kind of one of the bigger problems with it. So our lab wouldn't really be helping model how the disease is working.
Okay, yeah, I guess that makes sense. Well, I want to start us off with talking about Sweden. So there's been some information passed around about how Sweden is, they never went on lockdown. And I guess they're kind of going for the herd immunity effect. So there was an interview on the Daily Show, or I can't remember, whatever the Trevor Noah show is, but the leading doctor that is running all that stuff for Sweden got on there and he talked about it a little bit. And a couple of things that people need to understand about Sweden is, first off, they're more in line with that social or democratic socialism type government. And the way that their citizens trust their government allows them to actually do social distancing without being forced to by the police or, stuff like that. Americans are stubborn, and not only are we stubborn, but a lot of us are very skeptical of the government, skeptical of the media, which is reasonable. So I guess we can't really trust ourselves to a certain extent to behave the same way that Sweden can trust their people to behave. And then furthermore, because they have so many social programs, if they feel like they're sick, their government tells them, like, stay home. If you even think that you might be sick, stay home. And they get paid for it, like, immediately. There's no question about their insurance or unemployment or anything like that. So it's really easy for them to take off work and take out of school. And
They've also got healthcare. Exactly.
Yeah. Their healthcare provides much better than the way that our country is set up for those types of things. But like you told me before we got on here, their numbers are also really scary. And that's something that they admitted, was that they definitely didn't think that their death toll was going to be as high as it is.
So I will say the reason that people are suggesting quarantine is not to prevent overall death. It's not feasible based on the way viruses spread. The whole point of social distancing and quarantine is to slowly introduce the virus into the population so that it happens over time, because the biggest increase of death happens when there's too many resources being used up in a hospital. So there's not enough ICU beds, there's not enough ventilators for something like this, which is respiratory. There's not enough staff because staff are getting sick. So when you say quarantine, I think a lot of people think that you're trying to just reduce the amount of deaths, and that's not the case. You're trying to literally flatten the curve of patients. And I think people have been under the guise that we're doing that, and since numbers have gone down, that it's okay to relax those those measures, and that's just not the case yet. So what Sweden did is a strategy that countries can use. If they want to go ahead and get it out there as soon as possible, they're not mitigating deaths, but they are mitigating an economic impact, which is one approach to take. Mm-hmm. Now, that is more of a moral question. Do you value the economy over the amount of deaths that are happening? And something that makes Sweden not comparable to us, like you mentioned, they have so many more safety nets in place than we do. So it would make sense that they were able to provide unemployment if people needed to stay home. They were able to, pay for their health care, which is not something that everyone here has. So I think it's not a comparable model for a country like ours, especially a country that, because America is so large and it's so highly populated, you can't make a decision just based on one place.
Right.
Well, so I will say that approach could be doable. The only problem is the reason that you want to mitigate it, especially in the beginning, is because it takes time to acquire those resources. It takes time to acquire beds and staff, and it takes time to acquire ventilators, especially. So even if you're trying to get your big boom out of the way, you're still not prepared anywhere close than you would still need at least a few weeks to get more resources.
Right. And I think I remember where I was going with that now. So he said that they had reached about 80% capacity for their ICU beds at, different parts. And it's also different, just like in the United States, it's different for rural area compared to a heavily populated city or whatever. But there were some of their major cities that reached about 80% capacity. And that was with them actually being able to trust their society to take actual social distancing measures. So if you compare that to the United States, I think the only numbers that I saw were specifically for Georgia, but we were at like 70% capacity of critical need beds a week or two ago. And that was with us being forced into quarantine by the government. And so people see that, the deaths are starting to plateau, or the infection rate's starting to plateau. So we can just open up the economy now. Like, somebody compared it to pulling your parachute when you jump out of a plane, waiting for it to slow your fall, and then cutting the cord before you get to the ground. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. Like, we still need to continue to mitigate so that we can make sure that hospitals get the PPE that they need, make sure that beds aren't being overburdened and stuff like that. So there's one guy that is on my Facebook nonstop talking about, has it killed more than 1% of the United States yet? And it's literally every post that he comments on is just.
I don't understand why people. I don't understand why people bring that argument into it when they're talking about human lives. they're talking about mothers and fathers and people in families. I don't understand why they use that like it's nothing when you're talking about human beings.
Right.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I that's a really hot button thing for me.
No, I feel you. And I mean, I guess the other side of that is then they'll talk about, well, if the economy crashes, then, X amount of people commit suicide or overdose on drugs or whatever, which is also true. Like I'm going to do another interview with somebody else about the economic side of it and what those possible, deaths could come out of that. And just like our mental health in America in general is not good. And money is like one of the leading causes of people's, I guess, like spiral into mental health issues. But
health overall, mental and physical. The economic structure of this country is failing a lot of people.
Yeah, but I don't. First off, going back, like taking that back to your statement about like that's not the point. Anyways, we're not talking about saving some massive amount of the population from dying. Which, I mean, obviously, we want to save as many people as we possibly can. But it's not necessarily about the death number in the first place. It's about being able to maintain like sustainable healthcare in general. Because if we overburden the hospitals, then all kinds of different people are going to start dying because they can't even get into the ICU or they can't get the treatment that they need.
Right. I think a lot of people forget that there's still heart attacks happening. There's still car crashes happening. The reason you don't want to overburden the healthcare system is to try to spread those deaths out over a long time. It's still going to be a high number. You can't save everybody until there's a treatment that is 100% effective.
Right.
So I do understand the economic argument, and I'm coming from a place of privilege because I am still getting paid. So I do completely understand how it is hard for me to, I don't want to say empathize, because I really do empathize with the people that are struggling with this. And I think everyone is struggling with this. Outside of the very wealthy, I think everyone is having some kind of mental health problem or struggling with just the stress of the situation, because it is inherently stressful. But I think the problem isn't with quarantine. I think the problem is that there was no way to support a quarantine financially that there should have been. I don't understand why there was no pandemic, the pandemic task force ahead of this, because this kind of thing could have happened at any time for any reason. And this might not be the one that ends the human race, but we don't know when that is coming. That could happen in 10 years. And the fact that we weren't prepared for it, even though we've had starts to things like this that didn't end up being as bad, I think that says a lot. And I think people are using the, quote, low mortality rate, which it's not for something like this. They're using that as kind of an excuse to minimize the situation and how severe it really is right now.
Yeah, and actually you want to touch on the back and forth between people trying to say that their mortality rate is actually lower than it is, but the medical, like, I think it was a Harvard study or a Harvard professor, somebody that said, actually, it's probably the opposite of that.
Right. I think one of the biggest problems with this situation is the information that is being spread. People will see one study come out, may not even be a good study, or they'll see a meme on, Facebook, and they'll take that as fact. Mm-hmm. And they'll take information from this one little isolated bubble and use that to extrapolate to the entire world. And that's just not how science works. That's not how epidemiology especially works. Mm-hmm. So you have to take into account, there's a reason that there is a national task force doing this. I understand decisions cannot be made at a national level, but they're also getting all the information nationwide. Mm-hmm. So they're seeing how things are affecting the entire nation and not just these individualized communities that have different socioeconomic characteristics, that have different healthcare infrastructures. Like, all of these things come into play. So you can't just take this one little piece of information and use that to weaponize an argument because it's convenient for you. It's not It's just not how logic should work. Yeah, that's all I have to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. There's so much contradictory information out there. Like specifically looking into hydroxychloroquine and whether it's actually been proven effective or not, I found a bunch of articles that were negative on it. But then I talked to one of my friends who I know has been like pretty much like a proponent of it and saying like, no, there is good information on it. And he sent me those links. So it's like, if you want to find something that says that hydroxychloroquine should not be used whatsoever, or that it's bullshit and that Trump should have never said it, you can find that information. But also, if you want to find information that says that it works and that South Korea uses it as one of their main treatments, like right off the bat, then you can also find that information. So people just need to be aware that there is a lot of contradictory stuff out there. And really, I feel like it's too early for a lot of this stuff to even know what's true and what's not true. And it changes every day.
It changes every day because science is normally a very slow process. It takes a long time to gather enough data to make a powerful analysis and actually make, you hear about these small studies. And the reason that's important is if you have a small study, you could easily find significance, but that doesn't mean you have enough power with your study to extrapolate that to the rest of the population. Mm-hmm. I see a lot of people quoting articles from South Korea, like you said, Italy, China. China is its own, that's its own podcast.
Yeah.
That's its own thing. But like when they're saying that they're using that drug in Korea, most of the people in Korea are thinner than us. Their obesity rates aren't the same. Their cardiovascular disease rates aren't the same. So when you're talking about something that specifically has cardiovascular complications, it's weird to quote something from South Korea. So it's not like I can never say it right, so I just keep saying that drug. I'll call it Plaquenil. That's the brand name, but it's still being tested. And right now on UpToDate, which is a tool that physicians use for real-time evidence-based medicine to help guide their practice, right now it says, we're not telling you not to use this. It's not like bad, you're going to die, but if you would like to use this on your patients, we really encourage you to put it in a clinical trial so we can learn more about this.
Right.
And I think it's really important to know, like, people aren't lying to you. This isn't some big conspiracy. Like, yes, not all doctors and scientists are moral people. That we've seen that with, Andrew Wakefield, people falsifying data. But at the same time, this is so new. It is taking us time to actually figure out what's going on because it's a brand new virus. So it makes sense that things are changing. We just don't have enough data yet. Yeah.
And also people need to realize, like, I don't know if most of it's probably just from memes and other people's statuses off Facebook or whatever, or maybe the press releases when Trump was like, oh yeah, hydroxychloroquine is great and everybody should use it, whatever. People started hoarding it and using it like it's Advil and they should take it daily and stuff like that. That's also not how it works, and that's not what they meant it for. It's not a preventative drug. It doesn't keep you from getting the virus. And it only works in people that have mild to moderate, like in the tests that have been positive, only mild to moderate symptoms. And like maybe it'll shorten the amount of days that you need treatment or whatever, but it's not something that's necessarily going to save you from dying or going onto a ventilator if you already have a severe case. And it's definitely not going to keep you from catching the virus in the first place. So there's just like a lot of stuff that people don't think about. Also, like they don't dig into it to see like, okay, well, there's some kind of positive significance to this study. I'm just going to like share that and not worry about what that positive significance is and dig into it myself to see like what are they actually talking about treating in the first place.
Right. I think it's become so politicized, and obviously a virus doesn't have a political leaning, but at the same time, a president with no scientific or medical background should not be making statements like that against the advice of his expert advisors. It doesn't make sense.
Right.
And I think people are trying to cherry pick, and I saw this a lot with when he mentioned the UV, if we could somehow inject UV or, inject a disinfectant.
Yeah.
Especially on my social media, people were pulling these papers out of nowhere and saying, well, no, I found a peer-reviewed paper. And I would go, and because I'm a huge dork, and I guess really anxious about this whole situation, I would go and read them, and I would be like, this doesn't apply to the situation at all. You didn't read the paper, and if you did, you don't understand what they said,
Right.
Which is not,
Wasn't there an example
at least read it and try. You should be skeptical. You should be looking at papers. You should have questions.
But they weren't using, like, some of those studies. I remember seeing one of those, and you jumped on there and refuted it and were like, yeah, that was a study about using ultraviolet light as a disinfectant or whatever, but it wasn't on humans.
Yeah. And they say in the paper, they're like, well, this didn't work, but we think it could for this application. And I'm like, they literally said in their own paper, it doesn't work. Why are you quoting this paper? It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And I think I'm so active on your Facebook because of some of the responses you get. But I think one of the most horrifying comments I saw was someone was like, I went through and refuted a lot of things that they were saying, and they said, well, I'm not going to change my mind. I've made my mind up. And I think that's extremely narrow-minded, and it's not how we should be making our decisions. We should be making our decisions based on evidence.
Exactly, yeah. That always stumps me. I don't understand. Like, I talked briefly on that in my last episode about sexual assault, and a girl said, I don't care if there's a 1,000 rape allegations against Donald Trump. I'm still going to vote for him. Like, and I'm not going to believe any of them. Like, that's ridiculous. Like, the statistics don't back that up at all. Like,
you don't have to believe them, but you should at least be a little suspicious and maybe look into them.
Exactly. And that goes for both sides. Like, it doesn't matter who you're talking about. Like, if we know that like less than 5% of sexual assault allegations are false, then if somebody has 1,000 assault allegations against them, then 95% of that 1,000 is probably true. But anyways, let's get back on topic. So as far as hydrochloroquine is concerned, South Korea, which has been like a staple in,
they've been killing it.
Yeah, I've been referring to South Korea a lot, so I had to talk about hydrochloroquine and the fact that they use it like regularly. They use that in I can't remember, it was like Keltara or something like that. It's an HIV medicine.
I can't speak on that. I don't know anything about that.
Yeah, I didn't look too far into that one because nobody talks about it. But anyways, it's they've told their physicians to use either one of those, either Keltara or hydrochloroquine, and they also use it, I think, in combination with azithromycin. Is that what it's?
Yeah, Z-Pak. It's an antibiotic.
Yeah, Z-Pak. Yeah. So, but that being said, they're allowed to use it, and it is one of their top recommended treatments. But most of their physicians are not familiar with it, and they're also concerned about the possible side effects from it, so they actually lean towards that HIV treatment instead of hydrochloroquine. But they do have like some positive results as far as South Korea using it. So I'm definitely not trying to like shit on hydrochloroquine and be like, oh yeah, Donald Trump shouldn't, like, well, he shouldn't have ever said it, because it's not like, that's not responsible there, especially when he said it was like months ago and there hadn't really been any good information on it at all yet. But when he said that, there was like one doctor in Italy talking about it. One. Yeah. And he's not the only one though. Like, I think I tagged you on one where Dr. Fauci was talking about that reviticism. I don't remember the name of it, but
I think it's remdesivir.
Remdesivir, yeah, that's it. That trial, I don't think it finished, or if it has finished, then it hasn't been peer reviewed yet. So like, it's not that is also not documented to the gold standard that, the scientific community would like. So I personally thought it was a little bit irresponsible the way that he promoted it, because I didn't see any kind of disclaimer of him saying like, we need to keep looking into this. He was kind of pushing it a little too hard in my opinion, but At the same time, like, we need to be hopeful that these medicines are working and that those trials are accurate, but they, people just have to be careful. I actually took some notes on, so that Dr. Mike on YouTube has some really
I
good.
loved him, by the way. Thank you for showing me that guy.
Yeah, he's good. I like his videos, and he has one on misinformation from doctors. So, like, some famous doctors, Dr. Drew, who does like a lot of treatment, drug abuse treatment and stuff like that in Hollywood for celebrities and stuff like that, has a huge following. And he, in the early days, was comparing it to the flu, downplaying it and stuff like that. And then he later came out and said, I'm sorry, I was wrong. Everybody that said that it was like the flu is wrong. It's definitely like way more severe than the flu. And then Dr. Mike said something about, like, basically an expert opinion. We look towards expert opinions, but as far as like the pyramid of being able to trust information goes, an expert's opinion alone is the very bottom of that pyramid, with the top being meta-analysis, and then right underneath that is the gold standard of randomized controlled studies.
Right.
So
which are limited now. Something with randomized placebo-controlled studies is there's an ethical issue with something as deadly as COVID. You are supposed to treat everyone,
right,
ethically. So it's harder to get the kind of randomized placebo-controlled trials that we would want. There's a thing called compassionate use. So even if something is maybe not efficacious, and this is common in like stem cell trials and things for like ALS, that you're terminal and you're really suffering, they might try to throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks. And that gives us some information, and I think that's why a lot of what's coming out now is so confusing, is we have to expedite the process in order to continue treating people. Animal studies are still being done, and those are very helpful because you can manipulate any variable of an animal experiment, but it takes time to get the kind of huge trials that people expect from drugs that are FDA approved. Yeah. And it's a very difficult process to get a drug approved. It takes years. And, even after certain drugs get put through, even still, we find out years later that they're dangerous in certain situations and they get recalled. It happens all the time. There's no good way to predict human biology because it's so personalized. There's so many factors that go into how diseases work and how specifically medicine works in a person, because there's so many factors that affect your genes, how your body interacts with a drug based on your genes, based on your environment. So,
and then even what you're doing personally, like when you're using that medicine, also like what you're consuming along with that medicine.
Yeah, for sure. There's so many compounding factors that affect these things, and you can't control for everything. And that's why you need these huge studies to figure out what's actually effective. And, there's lots of things that aren't effective for everyone, but we kind of weigh the cost benefit of, is this drug effective for most people? Do we think it'll work for you? And what are the risks of the side effects?
Yeah. So another one, have you heard of Dr. Mercola?
Are these the urgent care doctors?
No, he's not. This guy's this is another one from the Dr. Mike Misinformation YouTube, but he was I think he said that this guy's mostly into homeopathic medicine, but he has a huge following. His YouTube page has 350 something thousand followers, and then I'm sure his Twitter and like Instagram and stuff is even more than that. And he tweeted something that said, first off, he said electromagnetic fields and 5G could be worsening COVID. And he started off by saying, quote unquote, while unproven, like 5G and electromagnetic fields could be making COVID worse. And that's just like,
first off, electromagnetic fields, just like in general, like from Wi-Fi, like what are they? Okay.
Right. And it's just like, there's no evidence to prove that whatsoever. And you're a doctor. And he even said, like, while unproven, like you already disqualified the rest of your statement. You could literally follow that up with anything and be like, while unproven, having a dog could possibly make COVID worse. It's just stupid.
Well,
But then he
you
said,
you could say something like "while unproven" and then give maybe a logical explanation, maybe just based on your knowledge of certain science or physical properties. But just saying that and then no explanation to follow it up is insane.
yeah, like, why are you saying that? What makes you think that, or whatever? But then he said this one's more troubling because it actually is like him recommending a treatment. Not only did he recommend the treatment, but he knows that this treatment is very dangerous. He said that nebulized hydrogen peroxide therapy is basically inexpensive and easy for you to do at your home using just the type of hydrogen peroxide you would find around the house. And then he went on to, in a different video, you can see him saying that the type of hydrogen peroxide that you could find at your house is really dangerous for human consumption because it has proprietary stabilizers in it. So basically you don't even know what's in the product. And then the CDC says it can cause systemic toxicity if inhaled or ingested. And then it like lists all the problems with it.
I would be concerned of anybody nebulizing anything on their own without the guidance of a doctor.
I don't even know what that is. Was it like vaporizing something?
Yeah, it's like putting it in a machine and it makes it like a vapor. So if you've ever seen somebody in when you're a little kid and you saw the one kid that had to go in the nurse's office and like suck on that thing, it's like a tube and then there's a thing that goes out the back. Yeah. Which they're recommending against nebulized drugs because it can aerosolize the virus. So
yeah,
don't buy something that nebulizes a chemical and then put that in your lungs. That seems like really dangerous, just logically.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And this guy, just on his YouTube alone, which not everybody has a YouTube, or even if they do have YouTube, they don't subscribe to channels. He has over 250,000 actual followers on his YouTube. So who knows how many people actually watch it or follow his Instagram and Twitter accounts and stuff like that. And this is negligent. Like, you're recommending a treatment that could actually kill people. That's
so you
crazy.
Said he's Dr. Mercola. Is he an MD? Does he have any credentials? Is he a practicing physician?
Let's find out. I think he is a MD, but let me check.
I also, while you're searching that, will say, like, if people want to try a more natural approach, I don't see anything wrong with people trying to be more healthy. But when you start interfering with actual medicine, or you start, telling people, hey, you don't need this medicine, you can use this natural alternative that doesn't work, I think that's a huge problem.
Yeah. It says he's an osteopathic physician.
Okay, so he's a DO?
That's just Google. Hold on. Yeah, he's a DO, Midwestern University. Yeah.
So, I mean, MDs and DOs are functionally the same. The education approach is just a little different. I'm not a doctor. I didn't go to medical school, but from what I know of it, osteopathic schools have a more like whole human wellness approach as opposed to like treatment or evidence-based medicine, even though they do use evidence-based medicine. Mm-hmm. I saw a DO growing up. I don't think there's like anything bad inherently about having that degree, but there is something really bad about telling people to do things that are dangerous.
Yeah, for sure. I think Dr. Mike is a DO. I think I saw that on his scrubs. Yeah, and then Dr. Oz too, right?
Yeah. So I don't like that guy.
I don't either. He says a lot of crazy shit, but it says he got a lot of backlash because he said that the panic is worse than the virus. Like, people being, I don't know, anxious about the virus is going to cause them more physical impact than the virus ever would, or some bullshit like that. And I guess Dr. Mike actually reached out to him and talked to him about it, and he said that Dr. Oz was very receptive of it and was like, next time I go on air, I'll make a statement about how he should have been more careful about how he said that, and maybe he didn't mean exactly like the way that came out or something like that. So it's crazy.
I could see the sentiment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Of people shouldn't be panicking, but this is also real and needs to be taken seriously.
Mm-hmm. You said you were watching the lady talking about masks. Like,
oh my gosh,
masks
that video. Of all the things you sent me, that was the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen.
And it says like top U.S. virologist. Yeah, she says that wearing masks is making you sick. And she also said that the mask. What she say? Oh yeah, they're not infectious if they're not coughing. Like she said something about like you have to be coughing. But
someone else said that kind of recently.
Who?
Kim.
Oh.
Like I wasn't aware that there were no asymptomatic carriers, and it's like, all right.
Yeah. And then the RNA part, like that goes a little bit over my head, but she said that it can't be coughed out. She also contradicted herself because she said the virus is not being coughed out because it's RNA, but then she says that the only way that it could be spread through the air is if it was coughed out. But even if it was coughed out, it couldn't reach you from 6 feet away.
So I think when I first talked to you about it, the weird thing was that she's using a lot of language that is accurate. She's just not using it in the right way. Mm-hmm. So she would use words like RNA, which, yes, COVID is an RNA virus. It's just a different way to package genetic material. But then she said it can't be coughed out because it's not in respiratory droplets. And it's like, that is exactly how. So the way a virus works is it's got this package on it, and the package can only attach to certain receptors in the body. So depending on that receptor, a virus might favor a certain kind of tissue, but it's limited by what receptors your body has. So that's why there's a lot of viruses that don't affect humans that might affect other animals, or maybe affect humans but don't actually do anything once they attach. So COVID attaches to an ACE2 enzyme, which is in the lungs. It's in multiple places, which is why you've also seen, I don't know if you've seen, but they say that it can also be transmitted through the fecal oral route, which is poopy particles get out and you somehow ingest those and they get in.
Yeah.
So, and that's because those receptors are in the small intestine and that kind of stuff. So she's using all these words that are very convincing. And I think an average person would hear that and be like, oh yeah, antibody, I've heard of that. RNA, I've heard of that, and might listen to her. But I don't even know how to respond to that lady. She was like, well, if you wear these, you're just going to like breathe in your own CO2 all day, and then you're going to you're not going to get oxygen. It's like, what do you think surgeons do? What do you think painters do? Like, yeah, it's very uncomfortable to have to wear a mask all day, but it's not going to kill you.
Right. And that was something that one of my buddies talked about too, was talking about, and there was a doctor, I think, that came up after her. It said former ER doctor Rashid Butter, I think he said that you're reducing the flow of oxygen, which releases cortisol, and that suppresses your immune system, so that you're making yourself more I guess vulnerable to getting sick if you did breathe it in or whatever. But like you said, doctors wear masks every day, dentists, painters, all kinds of people.
So many professions.
Yeah.
And some people are also wearing like N95s, which I don't know if you've ever had to wear one and be fitted for one, but they're awful. I have to wear one for some of the things I do at work, and they're so uncomfortable. They smush your face to all hell. They fog up your, it just sucks.
Yeah.
But you're not, you can still breathe. And there is evidence that people with certain lung conditions like COPD, they do have trouble with masks. And honestly, they should probably try to find people that can help them get the supplies they need anyway, because they're already so at risk. Mm-hmm. But the way that these doctors were talking, it made it sound like people were wearing masks 24/7, even in their homes. And that's not the point of wearing a mask. The whole point of wearing a mask is if you're somewhere where you cannot social distance, where you are in a crowded place like the grocery store, which, you have to have groceries, you have to eat. Unless you're like super equipped and you can completely sustainably make all of your food and supplies, good on you, do it. But that's kind of the purpose of a mask. And I've seen a lot of pushback to that where people are like, well, I shouldn't have to wear a mask because I don't want to. And I don't know if it's because they think they look silly or just because they feel like they're being infringed upon. But like, even if there's a chance it works, the risk to it, unless you have like COPD, is so low. Like, why wouldn't you just do it? Like, why do you care so much? It's just, I don't know. It's either lazy or selfish, or a combination of both.
Well,
I
I
don't
think
know.
that also ties back into the being, like, I guess, reluctant to believe certain information or whatever, because that's another thing that gets, like, this specific video that we're talking about gets pushed out, and they're like, oh, well, this is the video says that she's a top US virologist and she's saying that we shouldn't be wearing masks. So, I'm going to decide that her information is right because it fits, like, what I want to believe or whatever. It's just like the dangers of misinformation, really.
Yeah, and I also understand why people don't want to trust big bodies like WHO or CDC or whatever, but at the same time, no one is benefiting from this.
Right.
There's no like conspiracy that this is somehow a way to control the population, or, because the way that society works is everyone needs to be functional or no one is functional. Like, money can't just make money on its own. You have to have workers to make money. No one is maybe other than Clorox, but I'm not like, I don't know if there's like a big Clorox conspiracy or something.
Amazon.
Yeah. Amazon will be here till the end of the heat death of the universe. So
yeah. Is going to hate to hear this, but if it wasn't for Amazon, a lot of people would be, actually probably a lot more people would be dead, because the amount of people that are able to order their groceries and stuff online is crazy. Because if Amazon hadn't been doing that for years, then Kroger and Publix and all Target and all these other people would be making home deliveries of groceries and all this other stuff. So good for them.
Yeah. I mean, there's something to be said about large corporations, but at the end of the day, no one is winning from this. I don't understand the argument about how this is a man-made virus and it's some kind of conspiracy, because you get to the end of that and it's like, well, what does that person that made this virus have to gain then?
Mm-hmm.
What? That
was something else that I wanted to talk about. There's another video. I watched it right before we got on here. So, and it's like a 26-minute video. So, I can't remember her name right now. She worked on HIV and she worked on Ebola with Dr. Fauci, and something happened where I guess she was trying to raise some concerns over how they were working with it, and I guess maybe you could call her a whistleblower. And they basically, like, she says that they planted some kind of stuff in her house to make it look like she stole stuff from the labs, arrested her. They put a gag order on her for 6 years, so she wasn't allowed to talk about anything. And but anyways, in that video, she talks about the virus and whether or not it's man-made or natural. And she says, like, she's kind of careful about what she says, but she said that she wouldn't necessarily say that it's specifically man-made or that it was used on purpose or released on purpose, but that she wouldn't feel comfortable saying that it's natural either, because they brought it into labs like in North Carolina and a couple of different places in the United States dating like years back. I think at least back to 2015. They've specifically been studying and taking these bats from China into labs and testing to see if that virus could jump to a human. Like, literally exactly what happened. They've been testing that in labs. So I guess her rationale behind that is like, if we hadn't been doing that, then I guess maybe it couldn't have adapted as fast as it did or something. But she said that basically, like, from what happened with SARS-1 to this being able to do a direct jump from a bat to a person, according to her, was like 800 years worth of viral evolution or something like that. And it's not likely that it could have just jumped straight to a human like it did.
I mean, we've seen other coronaviruses jump, though. That's the weird thing. And, there's SARS and MERS too, which luckily wasn't very virulent. It didn't spread person to person very well. There's been so much research, and the reason that this research gets done is for situations like this. We need to be able to predict this stuff happening and potentially reduce it, we need to be looking at animals, because that is one of the most dangerous things. Is there's viruses everywhere. There's millions of viruses in animals. There's millions that affect even just for agricultural purposes. We need to be able to at least try to predict how these viruses are going to act. And hopefully, if we do see a jump, we know enough about the viruses that we can work on treatments. Mm-hmm. But, I saw a lot of people angry, and they were like, well, there was a paper about this virus making a jump from bats to humans. And it's like, yeah, we saw this coming. It's something that we knew was a possibility. And I don't know if you've seen Contagion, but it literally happens in a movie. I'm not saying you should take movies as a scientific fact, because I've seen a lot of movies with terrible science, but this is how that would happen. And it's different than a bacteria, because we have things that kill bacteria better than we have things that kill viruses. And it's really important to know, when you're doing viral research, there's a lot of markers we can put, because we can engineer viruses. That's something that we do. We take viruses. I was talking to you about how a certain research virus called lentivirus is used, and it came from HIV. It's people see these natural mechanisms of a virus, and they take them to hopefully hijack those systems that the viruses are using, and then use it for something positive. Mm-hmm.
They're using that for cancer treatment, right?
HIV specifically has been used in cancer treatments. Lentivirus is a gene therapy tool, so it's something that we can package therapeutic genes and deliver them to people, and they won't cause disease, but the gene will actually integrate into the genome and hopefully make proteins to cure a disease or treat a disease. And that's what I do pretty much. And we don't do a ton of lentivirus work. We do some, but we work with adeno-associated virus also. And these are things that we know exist, and we study them because we need to know how they work, because they can either be therapeutic tools, or in the case of SARS-CoV-2, we need to be able to predict what's happening, because otherwise shit like this happens, and there's a huge global pandemic that we potentially could have prevented.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that also goes back to your point about not having a pandemic response force or some kind of something set up for it, because like we both just said, we've been studying this exact thing for years. Specifically coronavirus from Chinese bats has been in labs, tested all over the United States and in the Wuhan lab in China. We knew that it was a possibility, and yet we weren't prepared for it somehow. That's kind of mind-boggling. And not only did we not so Trump got rid of whatever the pandemic agency was that was set in place. He got rid of it in 2018. But also the CDC has had funding specifically for pandemic response and planning and stuff like that. They've gotten tens of millions or billions of dollars for that. So, we should have had something in place, and it seems like we didn't have shit. We weren't ready for it at all.
Right. Well, and I think the CDC is using that money even now. You can kind of see how they're using it. I think a bigger problem I have with the possibility of a pandemic, obviously medically we should be prepared. There's only so much you can do for something novel that we don't know how it works. Even if we can kind of predict how it might evolve or how it might make the jump, the thing that you have to be prepared for is to be able to give people a way to stop the spread of the virus, which I don't think we had here. Mm-hmm. No, we didn't have the unemployment. We didn't have the backup plans that we needed in order to actually make it so people could stay home. And then another thing is just general education of the public, because I think that's been a huge problem in all of this is people, the science literacy in this country is so poor that, and the skepticism of, advice from experts, it makes it very hard to get people to do the things they need to do, because this isn't just, you shouldn't have to be told by a police officer that you can't leave your house. You should want to help out the general public. You should want to do this if you have the support systems that you need to do it. So I think it's a multifold problem, and I'm hoping that we as a society can use this as a learning tool, because the next one could have a 90% mortality rate in every population. We don't know what a virus is going to do.
Yeah. And so I've actually gotten a lot of shit because I'm pretty anti-big government in general. I'm very pro-liberty. Like, I'm all for protecting the Constitution and our freedoms and stuff like that. So people were like, how can you be supportive of, a quarantine or shelter in place order or whatever like that? First off, people try to say it's unconstitutional, which I don't necessarily think it is. Because
if people want to talk about the constitutionality of something without citing a court case, I just immediately write them off.
Yeah. So, yeah,
I've gotten at least a little bit of the legal side of this.
Yeah, but they also, like, people don't know what the governor's allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do. Like, Donald Trump is the president of the United States, and he doesn't even know or didn't know that he didn't have authority over the governors.
A stay-at-home.
When you say my authority, the president's authority, not mine, because it's not me. This is when somebody's the president of the United States, the authority is total, and that's the way it's got to be.
Like that, he doesn't know the Constitution. Most of the people in the United States don't understand the Constitution, so you can't just like get mad every time anybody does something and say, "Oh, my freedom, my rights." Like you're. Like, it's just stupid. So to support my support of the shelter-in-place orders, it goes back to the Sweden argument about being able to trust their citizens to actually socially distance. Even the insane amount of deaths that they did have in Sweden, most of that was centered around old folks' homes. It was a lot of old people that died in like that type of environment, like a hospice or something like that, which is really sad. But it wasn't necessarily from their public just being out and about and a lot of young middle-aged people dying or stuff like that. So if the United States was responsible to actually stay open and not act like idiots, then I would be all for it. But when you decide that your liberty and your freedom to go drink at a bar or pack the beaches for spring break or go to Mardi Gras, you decide that is more important than potentially protecting your mom or your grandmother from dying from a virus that you could bring home to them, then there's a moral fight in my head about, is your freedom to do that more important than this person's life? And that's when it comes down to, like, I'll protect freedoms all day, but I'm going to protect somebody's life over, your decision to go to the beach or whatever, or to go to a bar. So just in case anybody was wondering why I feel the way I feel about that, that's why.
I think a lot of the people that argue that also will say it's to protect their freedoms, and I think they're either bored or they're using that freedom argument just for the sake of using it. They're like, well, I want my freedoms protected. And it's like, well, yep. I mean, we're not really infringing on them. Can you just stay home? And they're like, no, I want to go out to Taco Bell. Like, screw you.
Yeah.
I think it's an excuse for a lot of the people, and I can't speak for everyone, people have different reasons. And I think, like, I do understand that there's a certain point where if we don't open up the economy, the risk that comes from that aspect of it is more than the benefit we're getting from social distancing. But like, it has to be done in a certain way. I understand restarting the economy, but like, why are you starting with tattoo parlors? Why are you starting with salons? Why are you starting with these things that have such close contact between two people? Instead of that, we should have protections for these people so they can stay home. They have the option. And then that way they don't feel obligated to put themselves or their communities at risk.
Yeah.
And like, couldn't you just waited like 2 more weeks, like just a little bit longer? Because the earlier you open, the more you undo what you've already done. And the people that are going to get punished for that is people like me, or people that are able to stay home, that have been home for, I don't know, 1,000,000 years now. That's what it feels like. I also want to leave. I want to see my family. I want to see my friends. Like, I haven't seen my niece, and she lives 10 minutes away from me. I haven't seen her in so long. That's the thing. Like, you aren't special in wanting these things. We have to, like, and I hate this because I keep seeing it on commercials. Like, we really do have to be in this together, or you're only as effective as your lowest common denominator in a situation like this. Mm-hmm. So just please wait a little bit longer. Stay home.
Yeah. And we also need to be like, when you're talking about opening up the economy, I'm also, a bunch of people are pissed off at me because they're acting like I don't think that the economy is important or whatever. But we need basically, like, we kind of need to emulate somewhat of what South Korea has done. Like, we need to have mass testing for everybody. We need to be pushing it so that we know who has the virus, so that we can quarantine those people instead of everybody, and, you know, still continue to protect the elderly and the people that are more at risk and stuff like that. Like, we can't just be like, okay, well, you know, the infection rate has dropped down a little bit or plateaued, so let's open it back up, even though we're not like mass testing everybody and or changing anything that we've done so far. Like, nothing has really changed that substantially yet. We don't know for a fact that we have an effective medicine to treat it. We definitely don't have anything to prevent it. We
don't have a vaccine.
Yeah, we don't have a vaccine. Our testing, like even the tests that we do have, they're not completely sure about the reliability of it because they're testing it on I can't remember what, I wrote it down somewhere, but they're not testing it with human samples. They're testing it with lab-made samples. So the 95% like positive tests that they're getting in the labs don't necessarily equate to, you know, mucus coming out of a human's nose. So
right.
You get false positives, false negatives. But yeah, we need to be focused on making sure that we have enough beds to maintain, enough ventilators, enough tests, and pushing those tests, because a lot of, like, I haven't been tested and I don't know if I can, like, can I just go get tested whenever I feel like it? Or am I going to have to show certain symptoms to get it? You know, like, you could be an asymptomatic carrier. You still should be able to go get tested just to make sure that you don't have it, so that you can quarantine yourself if necessary. But if we just open it up and just say, screw it, everybody just do whatever the hell you want, we're not going to worry about testing and taking care of hospitals, then it's not going to be good for anybody.
I think it'll also go a lot better when antibody testing is more widespread. But another problem with that is we don't know how long we make antibodies for this. This just started, you know, nationally. So I'm hoping that will help, though. It's something that I have the option to do, but it's full until I tried to schedule one for June and I couldn't get in. You know, there's only so many they can do in a day. So I think I do agree that the testing should have been completely ramped up before we started opening, and then maybe opening things with less human contact, where you're, you know, getting your hair blow dried and you're blowing a virus. It's frustrating. But I also, at the same time, to your point of people saying, like, why don't you care about this? It's like, of course I care. Of course I you know, I love my stylist. I love my tattoo artist. I'm pretty heavily tattooed, and I feel really terrible that I can't go support them right now. And I feel awful that they can't get the resources they need to keep a paycheck. But there's something bigger. The system is failing on a bigger level than me not wanting to end a quarantine. There's something else that should have been done differently before all this started, and I think people are focusing on the wrong problems. They're saying, well, you know, you can stay home and I'll go out and do stuff. And it's like, okay, that's great, but can we think about the fact that you weren't able, the people that needed to go back out and work weren't able to get what they needed? Can we think about that question, and less so like, why do I have to stay home?
Yeah, but also that argument of if you want to stay home, you still can, is kind of bullshit, though, because if we open everything back up and your employers say that you need to go back to work, like there was a huge thing with Gwinnett County Public Schools just now. They tried to make their teachers go back, I think, in the next 2 weeks, and the teachers, you know, they went to the media about it, and now, you know, GCPS is kind of like backpedaling and saying, like, never mind, we're not going to force you to do it. But if we just reopen the economy, that's going to happen to everybody. And so if your employer tells you that you have to go work at a job that's going to make you at high risk or whatever, and you don't want to go to it, you don't have the option to just stay home, because then you're going to lose your job and you won't qualify for unemployment, or, you know, whatever these other programs and stuff that they're giving out. Like,
right.
If a company is not like state mandated or whatever to stay shut, then their employees are not going to get the same benefits that they're getting right now. So it hurts people in so many different ways. Like, no matter how you do it, like we got to find some kind of middle ground. One thing that I think it was Dr. Mike and Dr. Fauci talked about was the likelihood of the virus going away during the summer and then coming back like really strong in the wintertime. And Fauci said that he thinks that that will happen. Do you know anything about like, is it going to be, or I guess you can't really say yes or no, but like flu season is during the wintertime. Like, is that similar to this in that aspect?
I mean, we don't really know yet, but if you think about viruses like the flu, like even the flu, you can get that any time of the year. It doesn't just like go away completely because it's not flu season. And another thing that I think is a big deal for that is if this is like a thing that's just going to be a new normal and it's like the flu and we have a vaccine at some point, are people actually going to go get vaccinated?
Right.
I can't speak to the seasonality of it, but like Dr. Fauci mentioned, there's countries that are in different climates that are still experiencing this virus. So this is not over, in my opinion, just based on everything I'm reading and opinions from people like Dr. Fauci. This is going to be a problem that we are talking about. Obviously not to this scale where we're all shelter in place quarantine forever, but this is going to be part of life now. Like it's not going anywhere. And if it does, awesome. I hope I'm wrong.
Yeah. One thing that he did say that I was like kind of confused on was he said that that reinfection is not likely, that if you recover from this, then you should have a lasting immunity. And that's different than the flu, right? Like, because if you can get the flu every year, even if you get the shot, like you can get the flu, it just won't be as bad. So
you can, but most people don't get the flu every year because even if the virus mutates, there's pieces of the virus that are still the same. So even if you cannot completely make antibodies for it, you might have antibodies that attach to pieces of it. They might attach to one part of the receptor and slow it down. And it's the same thing with the flu vaccine. Even if it doesn't prevent you from getting it, it makes you more likely. It makes it so your body is more equipped to fight it off. And I think the thing that Dr. Fauci said was more to the point, not necessarily of reinfection, but if you've already fought this off, it's clear your body is capable of making antibodies, helping you get rid of the virus. So if you do get it again, which there's conflicting evidence about reinfection, specifically coming out of Korea. I've seen studies that say both, but even if you do get it again, you're probably going to be able to fight it off because you did it before.
Yeah, that makes sense. Did we talk about that 2 doctors video? No.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so we can talk about that real quick. So there are 4 main points of that video were that the government is more focused on controlling the public than science, according to them. Then they said that way more people have it than we know, that there's a much lower fatality rate, and that it's actually more similar to the flu, and that we should reopen everything right now. So
I'll say, first of all, a couple of big medical institutions have come out with public statements condemning those guys, and they did so for a reason. They did a very small study, based in their isolated geographic region, and so something we do in science is we do a power analysis. It is something we do before we start a study, and we see based on whatever we're looking for, within our hypothesis, we see how many things we need to test in order to effectively prove that hypothesis. So for something like human disease, you need a huge sample size. And then to the point of sample size, it's also important to note that their sample was very biased. They're talking about how they had a relatively low number of mortality. I don't remember if they used mortality or infection based on their tests. But something we talked about before the video started, these guys are testing people coming into their urgent care center, and they obviously have some kind of symptoms, otherwise you wouldn't go to urgent care.
Right.
And I think it's also really important to note that they're also not ER doctors or ICU doctors, so they are not seeing the worst of this. Mm-hmm. They're seeing the people that aren't sick enough to go to the ER but still sick. So that's also giving them a pretty twisted view of why. I don't know why they think that that small bit of information could be used to open not even just their state, but the country.
Right. As if their population is representative of the entire United States.
Right. And, you know, it's the same thing with me sitting here giving you my opinion. I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, but like their opinion is still valuable. It's still information that should be considered when talking about reopening and, you know, especially in their region. But they're not experts. They don't have enough information to make that decision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so they said that there's way more people that have it or have had it than we know. And as you mentioned, like these are people going to urgent care because they have symptoms. So clearly a higher percentage of those people are going to test positive. That's not representative of the general public that maybe they didn't have symptoms at all. Like you're going to get way, way different numbers. That's completely biased information. And then trying to compare it to the death rate to the flu based off of their inflated infectious number, according to like what Dr. Mike was saying, is we're like COVID spreads 2 to 3 times faster than the flu does. And also we don't have generational immunity to the flu or to COVID like we do the flu. So it's just like I don't like saying comparing apples to oranges because you can actually make a lot of good comparisons of apples to oranges. But yeah, that idiom, it's comparing two things that are not comparable.
And I agree with that. I think there's a lot you can compare with COVID to the flu. They're both viruses. They both rapidly mutate, and, you know, they both cause human disease that has a relatively high mortality rate. But I think it's nuts comparing something to the flu that's been around for so long to something that literally was not a thing. That, you know, when I got married in November, it wasn't a thing.
Right.
It was like a whisper of something happening in China that no one took seriously. So it's crazy to me that people are using a comparison to something that we know so much about. We have a vaccine for, and like you said, we have a lot more immunity just as a population. And even then, people don't go get vaccinated.
Nope. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And there's a USC LA County study, and this is, I mean, basically the same exact thing as what the two doctors did. It was like, yeah, they said that there's like 28 to 55 times higher than reported confirmed cases. And, but it's the same situation where they're testing people that have symptoms or testing people for, this wasn't testing for positives. This was testing for antibodies.
Yeah, so antibody tests are serology tests. So they'll give you a result if you make antibodies to it at all, which not everybody makes antibodies to every pathogen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what the USC LA County study was. It's similar to the two doctors things, but the two doctors were testing for positive COVID tests. The USC LA County study was for antibodies, and they said that it was like 4% of the people that they tested had antibodies, and that's 28 to 55 times higher than the reported confirmed cases in the United States. So they pretty much tried to push that same type of propaganda as the other doctors did. And once again, they're testing people that came to them and said, hey, I think I might have had this back in December or January. I want to see if I have antibodies to it. So naturally, you're going to have more people that have antibodies because they think that they had it.
Right. And the same reason for me, I'm going to get an antibody test because I was really sick at the end of February.
So was I.
Otherwise, I wouldn't be going, except for my, you know, I get pretty high exposure comparatively where I work. But obviously, if I think I had it, I'm going to go try to get an antibody test. Mm-hmm. Same thing with a real-time PCR test, the one that they do on people with active infections. I'm going to go get a swab because I have symptoms and I think I have it right now. Like, how many people are going out without symptoms to get a swab test?
Yeah. Do you know, like, I guess my real question is, like, how long is it going to be before we're able to, like, when should we be able to just be like, oh, well, I think I might have it. Can I just go to my urgent care and get tested? or do you have to have symptoms, or?
So from what I'm hearing, and this is completely anecdotal, based on, where I live and people that I'm friends with on like social media and stuff, it's regional. So in my community, there's a place where I can go right now, even without symptoms. I can go and get a swab test, not an antibody test. Those aren't as widely available. There are some private companies starting to offer those, but I would be wary of having to spend money, and depending on the company, I would be wary of how accurate those results are.
Mm-hmm.
But from what I'm seeing, it's kind of community based, and I don't know if that's an information problem where people don't realize that they can go get tested, or if it's like they just don't have the resources yet.
Okay, yeah. So with over-reporting, like the main thing that people have been sharing a lot about is saying like, if you get hit by a truck, but you also happen to have COVID, then you're going to go down as a COVID death. And so we're over-reporting COVID deaths because anybody that's tested positive, not only anybody that's tested positive, but also even if you haven't been tested, according to CDC guidelines, if you meet the CDC standard, then they can still put it on your death report or whatever.
Yes. So this is something I've been seeing a lot on my social media, where there's like, people are assuming that there's some kind of people are assuming that there is some kind of like, a bonus almost for a hospital reporting a death as a COVID death.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's kind of like a loaded thing, because yes, there is additional relief funds being allocated to people and communities affected by COVID, and to help those hospitals that are having to treat uninsured COVID patients. But it's not like they're taking, like you said, someone hit by a truck and saying like, oh, they died of COVID. Like, that's ludicrous.
Right.
The CDC guidelines actually say within like a reliable certainty, even if this person didn't test positive, either because we didn't have the test, maybe the test wasn't accurate, or maybe they just aren't positive, based on the clinical presentation that we're seeing. And also, it's really important to note that they're also still testing for other respiratory diseases that they can within reason.
Mm-hmm.
So they're still going to test for the flu. They're still going to try to see if you have some kind of bacterial infection. But I think if you compare the amount of deaths that are happening and being overreported, it kind of would balance out with what's being underreported, because a lot of people aren't going to a hospital, or they're getting really sick really quickly and dying at home before they can be tested.
Mm-hmm.
Or people that aren't being tested at all and are asymptomatic or don't have a very bad symptoms of the disease.
Yeah, like New York City, I don't know if they're still doing it this way, but one of the things that I read was that New York City was deliberately not counting or testing people that died in their homes. And if they didn't test them, even after they died and the body was recovered, then they didn't count that, even if it was really likely that person did die from COVID. So there also definitely a lot of places that aren't assuming that you had COVID. But also the standard that the CDC guidelines put out isn't just to say like, like a doctor can just be like, oh, this person had a cough, so they died of COVID. It's something that they're allowed to put on the death certificate as like a contributing factor, not necessarily that they died specifically from it. But if they had pneumonia, and they also look at the exposure, like was this person, their wife had it and they developed pneumonia, but they happened to test false for it, but they also tested false for the flu and every other respiratory illness, then it's reasonable that it was a probable contributing factor, not necessarily that like they're like, oh, okay, well everybody's dying of COVID now. Like it's just twisted. Like some of that information is true. The CDC did say that you're allowed to put it on a death certificate without a positive test, but there's a lot of reasoning for that. And there's also a lot more layers to it than just simply saying doctors can do whatever the hell they want. And another side of that is like the article that I was reading about it referred to it as upcoding, saying that a patient has COVID when like maybe they didn't have COVID or whatever. First off, there's civil and criminal implications to that, and that could result in the hospitals being taken out of the Medicare program, which is easy money for them. Like they don't have to worry about getting paid because Medicare is paying them. So that's something that they obviously are going to shy away from. Anything that could possibly get them taken out of, guaranteed government money. But besides that, you mentioned that the idea of it is that these hospitals are getting paid for the death certificates saying COVID, but that's not even accurate either. They're getting paid for treatment. So if they have to treat somebody on a ventilator, then they get more money like towards the treatment that they gave that person. So you would have to be saying that I don't know, I went in with a freaking bruised knee or something like that, and they threw me on a ventilator when I didn't need it. Like there's requirements for you to even get to a ventilator. You have to have like blood saturation levels at a certain level before they're allowed to put you on a ventilator. Like you're assuming that doctors are literally giving people treatment that would kill them on purpose so that the hospital can get some kind of Medicare benefit out of it. Like it's just kind of crazy.
Which, in, I would say, very isolated cases, that does happen, but that goes against literally everything that a doctor is supposed to do, including the oaths they take in order for ethical treatment. And in addition, just to them upholding their own moral standard and codes of their field, like there's consequences to these things. Mm-hmm. If you lie, it's fraud. Like you can be charged with that. And like you said, you lose funding. And it's when you say things like, well, okay, they get this much money for treating a COVID patient, and then you also get an additional this much for treating a patient on a vent. And that's because it's more expensive to treat a COVID patient. You have to put on more PPE. You have to have them in isolated imaging machines. You have to have them in different situations that you would have another patient. And then in addition to that, like when someone's on a vent, they have been probably in treatment for a while. They're getting around the clock care. They're way more, there's a lot more treatment that is happening when you're on a vent because at that point you're critical. Mm-hmm. So it costs more to treat them than someone that came in, maybe got some antivirals and then was able to be discharged without having to be on a vent. It would take a shorter time, so it makes sense that it would cost less money than someone on a vent. I think it's problematic to take numbers like that, take them out of context, and then use them as like it's some kind of bonus, just free money, and that's not how any of this works.
Yeah. So Dr. Scott Jensen is the guy that I guess he's the one that pushed that from the beginning, and he's a Minnesota state senator. I'm pretty sure he's a Republican, and he's actively running for some. I need to look that stuff up. I'll throw that in here somewhere. But
was he running for Secretary of State?
I'm not sure.
Or was he I think the Secretary of State said something about that too.
It might be the same person, but I know that, I mean, so he might have some type of political bias that's, wanting to spread that type of information because he knows that his base of people believe that way. So he's fueling their information, to question it because, they're trying to say that we don't need to be on lockdown or whatever. But then he was interviewed by what was like factcheck.org or whatever. And he straight up said, I don't think that hospitals are actually doing this. Like he said that Medicare incentive or whatever, I guess could potentially like make somebody think about doing it if, because money influences people to do a lot of crazy things. But he said specifically, I don't believe that hospitals are actually intentionally. He doesn't think that hospitals are intentionally mislabeling people or mistreating people or anything like that for money. So basically, I mean, he's admitting that he was really irresponsible in saying that in the first place. But there was one other thing. The Medicare guidelines for how they pay out for COVID, it said that they're similar to other respiratory illnesses of the same caliber. So if it was some other type of respiratory illness that required a ventilator and the same symptoms and the same treatments, it would be the same payout regardless. So it's not like, oh, like COVID patients get this special rate. It's the reason that they're getting that special rate is specifically because it requires the ventilator, it requires round the clock care and all this other stuff like that. So that also kind of defeats that argument a little bit, because you could go in with some kind of other severe respiratory illness and that hospital would still get the same Medicare payout.
Right. It's based on treatment received, services received, not necessarily what you were treated for.
Right.
I just think, especially this part of the conversation we're having, I think it's really important for politicians and the general public to understand that there are actual consequences to the things that they say, and there are heavy consequences for the information that they spread. So it's really important for us to be skeptical. And you know me, but the people watching this don't know me. But you have to understand like how much research I put into this in order to form my opinions, because I think it's really important that people are making decisions and spreading information based on evidence and not because of their feelings or because of political motivations, which I don't have any, so you don't have to worry about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, words have consequences. They just do, especially in a time like this.
Yeah, it's difficult because it's so it's such a polarized thing, and there's like a lot of emotions on both sides. I can understand why, a small business owner could be extremely depressed, or even just somebody with mental illness that needs to be around people or needs to be outside. Like I can understand all of those things. I have PTSD myself. Like I've lost a lot of or not a lot, but I've lost some military friends to suicide, and like that's a very real thing. Like I've had those thoughts myself, and so I can see why people are very concerned about opening up the economy and being able to do recreational things just for your own well-being and stuff like that. But we need to be careful about the information that we're spreading, and not only that, we need to be careful about digging further in to the information that we're letting ourselves consume in the first place. Like just don't read a headline and not look into it, or like even if it's like, hey, this medical professional said this, like you need to see if there's anything that contradicts that, and maybe look and see what is that person's background in the first place, what qualifies them to make that statement in the first place or whatever.
And also recognize what you don't know. So I came on here and I gave my opinions based on the things that I could explain and the things that I know, not only where to find the research, but how to do the research based on my training and my experience. So I think it's also really important, and you shouldn't feel ashamed if you don't understand something or you don't feel like doing the research. You just shouldn't also be a proponent of a misguided or misinformed opinion, because you can have your opinion, but you don't get to somehow make that into a fact. And I will say, for anybody that knows me personally, like if you ever want me to read something and I have the time, I will do it, and I will explain whatever I can. And I will also admit to you when I have something that's in front of me that's way over my head. And I think that that's really important for people now to be okay with. You don't have to understand everything, but maybe listen to the people that or do this for a living or have experience with it, or people like Dr. Fauci who have been doing it forever. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think that's all I'll say about that.
I really strongly agree with that. And just a personal example for me is like the economic side of it. I understand people's concern for it. I understand the mental health concern for it and all that stuff. But as far as like economics is concerned, that's not like an area of expertise for me. So I couldn't personally like try to talk to anybody about, what does this look like? What's a projection, an economic projection of, what this is how this is going to play out for the next 6 months. I couldn't personally do that. So what I'm going to do about that is find somebody that I think that I can trust that has knowledge and a background in that. And we're going to do another episode for that. And so that we can do the same thing that me and you just did, look at contradictory evidence, what does everything look like? Yeah. I just don't understand how people can just, if you have no knowledge of something and you're not fact checking it and you're not like listening to both sides of the story, then you're doing yourself a disservice and you're doing everybody else a disservice by sharing that information.
Agreed.
thank you again for doing this. I know I took a lot of time out of your day. Let's say cheers. I'm drinking a Tecate because yesterday was Cinco de Mayo. So cheers.
Drinking a Merlot. Thanks for having me, David. That was really fun.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like we said, like this information changes all the time. So if any kind of more crazy stuff comes out later on, we can always do another episode if you want to talk about anything else. So
I would love to.
but yeah, all right. Have a good day.
All right. I'll see you later.